Vatican, 1992. The world was still adjusting to the geopolitical shift after the Cold War, and inside the walls of Rome, deeper tremors were shaking the foundation of the Catholic Church. Among those disturbed was Father Lorenzo G. Morelli, a Jesuit priest and theologian born in 1948 in Naples. He was a respected professor at the Pontifical Gregorian University, yet increasingly disillusioned with the direction of modern faith. Financial scandals involving the Vatican Bank, combined with growing secularism and doctrinal ambiguity, led Lorenzo to a painful realization the Church might have lost its original light. Determined to search for what he called the rooted truth, Father Lorenzo resigned from his academic post in early 1992 and set off on a journey not sanctioned by the Church. Armed only with an old Latin Bible, a journal, and unwavering belief, he departed from the Jesuit headquarters at Chiesa del Gesù in Rome, heading east. His destination, the mystical highlands of Asia, where the Jesuits had once flourished in secret centuries earlier. Unlike typical missions, this was not to convert, but to listen, to witness, to understand whether the divine still whispered beyond the boundaries of doctrine and tradition. As Father Lorenzo made his way across Eastern Europe into the Asian continent, his heart remained torn between reverence and rebellion. The Vatican had not expelled him, but neither did it bless his journey. What he was undertaking was considered rogue, a personal spiritual quest without ecclesiastical oversight. But Lorenzo was undeterred. He believed something vital had been lost in the Church, and if he couldn't find it within the Vatican walls, he would go searching beyond them. By the summer of 1992, he had crossed into Western China, traveling under the name Laurent Morin, to avoid attention from local authorities. China, at the time, remained deeply suspicious of foreign missionaries. Though the Cultural Revolution had ended over a decade prior, the scars it left on religious practice were fresh. Christianity was legal only under state-sanctioned patriotic churches, and any independent spiritual activity, especially by foreigners, was under strict surveillance. Father Lorenzo had studied Jesuit missionary history deeply. He was following in the footsteps of Matteo Ricci, the 16th-century Italian Jesuit, who had entered China disguised as a Confucian scholar. But unlike Ricci, Lorenzo was not here to convert anyone. He was searching. One evening, after weeks of discreet travel, Lorenzo arrived in a quiet mountainous town in the Gansu province, Danjeku, a settlement barely appearing on any Western maps. Nestled between valleys and shadowed by ancient pine forests, the place exuded a strange stillness, as though time itself had chosen to pause here. Lorenzo was struck not just by the town's physical seclusion, but by its spiritual emptiness. He tried to attend a local Buddhist gathering, but found it hollow more performance than prayer. At one Daoist shrine, he encountered an elderly master revered by locals as a sage. But even here he sensed only echoes of past glory, not living wisdom. Through his contemplative exercises developed over decades of Jesuit meditation and Ignatian reflection, Lorenzo began sensing what he called a veil of disconnection. He later wrote in his journal, "There is doctrine, there is ceremony, there is reverence. But the divine voice, it has gone silent. Something has interrupted the current between man and heaven." It was in Danjeku that Father Lorenzo would experience the most decisive spiritual moment of his life. And it would not come from any temple scripture or cleric, but from something far stranger and far beyond the earth. In the dim hours of dawn, surrounded by pine-covered cliffs and fading incense smoke, Father Lorenzo climbed the narrow stone steps leading to an abandoned Taoist shrine nestled deep in the forest above Danjeku. The shrine was said to date back to the Qing dynasty, and though the wooden beams were cracked and the roof partially collapsed, Lorenzo felt a strange compulsion to enter. There were no monks here, only the faint echo of ritual long extinguished. On a makeshift altar sat a faded statue of Laozi, half covered in moss, its features worn down by centuries of weather. Lorenzo lit a single candle, knelt on the dusty floor, and began to pray, not to Laozi, nor even formally to the Christian God, but to whatever force in the universe still listened. He prayed for 1 full hour, not a prayer of words, but of presence of stillness. He emptied his mind, held his breath, and reached with something deeper than theology. He sought not to declare, but to receive, and something answered. A sudden rush of wind swept through the shattered walls of the shrine. The candle flickered violently and then extinguished. Lorenzo's spine stiffened. He felt a presence, not one of fear, but of immense gravity, as if he had just entered the attention of something that normally did not notice men. Then came the voice. It did not speak in Latin, Chinese, or any earthly tongue. It did not sound at all. But deep within his consciousness, words formed like ripples over water. The path you seek no longer flows through doctrine. Its waters have dried. But listen, still beyond the structures, beyond the saints, beyond your names, truth waits. Follow the road below. You will meet a witness. The moment passed as quickly as it arrived. Lorenzo collapsed onto the ground, breathing heavily, his face damp with sweat. He remained still for another hour, unsure whether what he had experienced was divine delusional or something beyond such distinctions. But when he finally stood, something inside him had changed. He no longer searched for signs. He was now following a summons. And so, with nothing but his journal and a thin shawl around his shoulders, Father Lorenzo descended from the ruined shrine and returned to the village, unaware that within 24 hours he would come face to face with 2 beings who were not of this world, and whose existence would rewrite everything he believed. The following afternoon, the village of Danjieku was shrouded in mist. A fine drizzle blurred the outlines of the tiled rooftops and narrow alleys, as if the entire town had been wrapped in silk. Lorenzo, still shaken by the events at the shrine, wandered the market square aimlessly. His senses sharpened, yet uncertain of what they were seeking. That was when he saw them. A man and a woman, perhaps in their late 20s, stood near a tea stall dressed in pale gray coats that seemed oddly resistant to the rain. They were beautiful, strikingly so, with symmetrical faces and clear, unblemished skin. Their features seemed to belong everywhere and nowhere, not quite Asian, not quite European, and yet too perfect to be accidental. Lorenzo's breath caught. It wasn't their appearance that alarmed him, it was their stillness. While the townspeople bustled past, dodging puddles and adjusting umbrellas, the pair remained completely motionless. They didn't look at the crowd, didn't seem to belong to it. Their eyes weren't scanning for food or shelter or directions. They were scanning for something else. When Lorenzo walked past them, his instincts flared. Over decades of contemplative prayer and what Jesuits call discernment of spirits, he had developed an unusually precise sense of human presence. But as he passed these 2, he felt nothing, no resonance, no trace of soul. He slowed. In an act both impulsive and fearless, he turned and looked directly into the woman's eyes, and in that instant everything changed. He saw not memories, not emotions, but data racing behind her gaze like a library made of light. He saw star fields unfamiliar to astronomers, geometric symbols he had never encountered, and a sense of distance so vast it collapsed language itself. The woman flinched. The man looked sharply at her, then at Lorenzo. Their bodies stiffened. For the first time, they seemed startled not by their exposure, but by the fact that someone had pierced their disguise. They approached him slowly, deliberately. The crowd, as if on cue, dispersed. Lorenzo stood his ground, pulse steady, heart pounding. The man spoke not in Mandarin, not in English, but in a voice that seemed to override language altogether. "You saw us. Please, do not tell the others." Lorenzo didn't respond. He simply nodded once and turned to walk away, knowing deep in his bones this was only the beginning. They met again that evening just beyond the edge of Danjieku, where the dirt path gave way to a thicket of whispering bamboo. The mist had lifted, but an unnatural hush still cloaked the land. No dogs barked, no birds called. It was as if the entire landscape had been paused. The man introduced himself as Iliar, and the woman as Syrah, names that, while spoken softly, echoed in Lorenzo's consciousness with a weight that defied language. They did not offer handshakes or pleasantries. Their urgency was immediate. "You see beyond the veil," Iliar said. "You must understand we're not here to harm, but we cannot be revealed." Syrah added, her tone almost desperate. "If they find out we've been detected, we will be extracted, and everything we've learned here will be lost." Lorenzo, still composed, spoke with the calm resolve of a man who had spent his life seeking uncomfortable truths. "I won't report you," he said quietly, "but you must tell me who you are and why you're here." There was a long pause. Syrah looked to Iliar. He nodded. "We are from a system you do not know. You have no name for it because your telescopes have not yet seen its light. But we are not the only ones. Many civilizations exist beyond what you call the solar system. Ours is simply older." What followed was not so much a story as a transmission, a carefully filtered stream of concepts projected not just through words, but through imagery, sensation, and resonance. Lorenzo saw cities that floated above oceans of mercury. He saw spacecraft shaped like crystalline organisms. He felt what it meant to experience consciousness not tied to a body, not even to time. But all our knowledge, Iliar said, has led to silence. Our science can map galaxies. Our machines can prolong existence, but we cannot feel grace. We cannot die as you die, nor be reborn as you are. We observe your prayers, and we do not understand them. They had come not as conquerors or saviors, but as students. Students of something they could not fabricate: faith. The ability to surrender to something higher. To worship not out of data, but out of awe. Lorenzo was stunned. He had long feared that humanity was losing its soul. But now he realized it still had something that no technology in the universe could replicate. And someone somewhere far beyond the stars wanted to learn how. Over the next 3 nights, Lorenzo met with Iliar and Syrah beneath a collapsed pagoda deep in the mountain woods. There, they spoke sometimes in words, often in thoughts, occasionally in pure memory. There are over 300 sentient civilizations within 1,000 parsecs of your planet, Iliar explained. Some are aquatic, some communicate through magnetic resonance. Others never developed vocal speech at all. But they all have one thing in common. They've reached the limit. Lorenzo leaned in. "The limit of what?" Syrah replied, her voice tinged with something that sounded like sorrow. "Of meaning. The civilizations they described had achieved things beyond human imagination. Some had erased disease entirely. Others had abolished death through consciousness replication. They had constructed artificial stars, terraformed barren planets, and mapped neural patterns across light years. But they had no art, no worship, no mythology. Science, Iliar said, became not a tool, but an idol. We replaced mystery with measurement and wonder with control. In doing so, we lost the one thing that allowed us to become more than biological equations." Lorenzo was silent. This wasn't just a critique of alien civilizations. It was a mirror, one increasingly relevant to Earth itself. "We learned to make anything," Syrah added, "except purpose." Worse still, Iliar explained that once a civilization hit this point of maximum complexity, it began to decay. Not physically, but spiritually. The soul, if it had ever been there, atrophied. Civilizations with infinite knowledge but no meaning began to implode. Some had already vanished, not from war, but from cultural suicide. That's why they came to Earth. "Your species is young," Iliar said. primitive, violent, often irrational. But you still sing. You still kneel. You still believe. They had studied religions across the planet, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, even forgotten tribal rituals, and found in them something that could not be quantified: surrender. The capacity to trust the unseen, to sacrifice comfort for conviction, to cry out to a God who may not answer and still wait. That, Eliar concluded, is the one thing our kind can no longer do. Lorenzo finally spoke. "And you believe we can teach you?" They didn't answer. They didn't have to. One night, under a pale crescent moon, Sira broke the silence with a sentence that sent chills through Lorenzo's spine. "We are not the only ones here." Eliar nodded. "There are others, many others, already living among your kind. Some have been here for decades." Lorenzo's mind reeled. He had spent years reading speculative theology and fringe cosmology, but this was no theory, it was a confession. "Are they in governments?" he asked. "In science labs, churches?" "Yes," Eliar said simply, "in all of them. But not as manipulators, as students." They explained that after centuries of sterile advancement, several civilizations independently and almost simultaneously realized something was deeply wrong. Despite mastering gravity cloning, even interdimensional travel, they were spiritually starving, so they turned their gaze to Earth. It wasn't our weapons or economics or spaceflight that drew them. It was our funerals, our lullabies, our pilgrimages, our irrational kindness to strangers, our weeping before invisible gods. "These are not weaknesses," Sira said, "but artifacts of something we lost." Some of their kind had taken human form through advanced mimicry, adapting skin-speech posture. They lived unnoticed in cities across the globe: New York, Kyoto, Cairo, Buenos Aires. A few even joined religious orders, attended liturgies, whispered prayers they didn't fully understand. But they couldn't replicate belief. Not truly. "We can mimic the gesture," Eliar said, "but not the surrender." Their hope, to observe humanity long enough to remember what awe felt like, to perhaps reignite a spark in their own dying species. "Some of us have failed," he admitted. They grew envious, bitter. They believe if they can't reclaim what was lost, then neither should you. But others, Sira whispered still hope. Lorenzo sat in silence, the bamboo leaves swaying around them like sentient witnesses. He suddenly recalled a young man he once mentored at seminary, brilliant, emotionless, always watching. A fellow priest who recited the liturgy perfectly, yet never once closed his eyes in prayer. Was he one of them? How many? Lorenzo asked. "Enough," Eliar said, "to learn or to erase." "You think your greatest breakthroughs came from genius," Eliar said, "but many were borrowed." The words hung heavy in the cold night air. Over the next hours, Lorenzo heard things that would make most men question the foundations of history. Sira explained that while observation was the primary directive for most extraterrestrial watchers, unintended transmissions of knowledge had occurred, some subtle, some seismic. Your integrated circuits, your fiber optics, even early nuclear theories, all seeded by fragments, tiny leaks in the veil. Lorenzo was stunned. "Are you saying we were given these things?" "Not given," Sira clarified. "Echoed. Your minds picked up on patterns we didn't intend to project. Genius, yes, but genius activated by proximity." In the 1940s, after an unprecedented spike in UFO sightings, particularly near Los Alamos, and Roswell, Earth's scientific curve began to bend sharply upward. Computer science exploded. DNA was mapped. Satellite systems emerged. Information moved faster than morality could keep up. "We underestimated your speed," Eliar admitted, "and your hunger. Some alien factions believed they were accelerating Earth's evolution for the better. Others saw it as dangerous, giving matchsticks to children in a library of gunpowder. The results were mixed. Humanity advanced rapidly but unevenly. For every vaccine, there was a weapon. For every data network, a surveillance system. AI could imitate empathy, but not ethics. You built machines that mimic thought, Sira said, but not spirit. Even more disturbing, some of the alien observers had become seduced by Earth's chaos. They started influencing politics, technology, even culture, not to learn, but to control. They grew tired of reverence, Eliar said. They chose power instead. This faction, the interveners, believed that if humans could not protect their own spiritual legacy, then perhaps it should be erased and rewritten with order, precision, and logic. A clean reset. Earth reprogrammed. Lorenzo was speechless. The very technology he once praised as evidence of divine blessing might have been a side effect, a shadow cast by something trying to get closer. And what about faith? Lorenzo asked, finally. Still untouched, Sira whispered, still out of reach. It was the one thing their machines could not download. The one thing still protected by silence, by mystery, by choice. And it was that one thing, fragile, irrational, beautiful, that now made humanity priceless. Dawn broke slowly over the mountains of Danjieku. A pale gold light seeped through the mist, washing over the ancient trees and cracked rooftops. Father Lorenzo stood alone, notebook in hand, coat damp with dew. The night's revelations echoed in his mind like thunder under still water. Eliar and Sira were gone. They had vanished before sunrise, leaving no footprints, no traces, only a final message whispered directly into his thoughts. Protect what we cannot possess. Lorenzo didn't return to Rome immediately. For weeks, he traveled in silence through monasteries, ruined temples, even abandoned airfields, searching not for proof, but for peace. He no longer needed validation. What he had seen and heard was enough to change the direction of his life, and perhaps in time the church itself. In his private journal, now archived anonymously in a Jesuit library in Avignon, he wrote, "Faith is not a construct. It is not a comfort. It is an anomaly, a divine rebellion against entropy, and it is ours alone." He understood now that the human soul, flawed, flickering, fervent, was not a defect in creation, but a rare feature. The universe, vast as it was, had produced civilizations that could stretch time-bend matter and code galaxies, but not one could recreate the sacred irrationality of belief. Not one could kneel without knowing. Not one could forgive without being asked. Not one could die with hope. That, Lorenzo realized, was humanity's true power. Not dominion, not intelligence, not technology, but its capacity to surrender to wonder, to reach upward into the unknown and whisper a name with no reply. And perhaps, just perhaps, that whisper was being heard. As he walked back toward the chapel ruins near the border, Lorenzo looked to the sky. A shooting star blazed across the horizon. Most would call it a meteor, but he knew better. He smiled, placed a hand on his chest, and whispered a final prayer, not for protection, not for revelation, but in thanksgiving. Because he understood in a universe filled with impossible machines, to have a soul was the greatest technology of all.